Welcome to The Explainer. Now, if you follow economics, you know it's often, well, dressed up as this super rigid science, right? Like it's just a world of absolute mathematical certainties and charts that can magically predict the future. But the reality is actually far more fascinating. Economics is fundamentally the study of human behavior. And because we humans are endlessly complex, economics is way less of a hard science and much more of a highly debated study of our choices. So today, we're going to completely demystify this subject. We'll strip away all those complicated formulas and just look at the competing theories that try to explain how we survive, thrive, and actually make decisions in a world where resources are limited. Former U.S. President Harry S. Truman was notoriously frustrated by the conflicting advice he'd get. He famously asked for a one-handed economist because, as he put it, all my economists say, on the one hand, on the other. It's such a brilliant quote, and it serves as the perfect hook because it establishes exactly what we're about to dive into, a world built entirely on competing perspectives. You see, economists rarely agree universally simply because they're dealing with variables that are just constantly shifting. To understand how economists even begin to tackle a subject this massive, it really helps to use an analogy. Imagine a huge, thriving city. Now, for that city to function properly, the city planners have to look at the overall metropolis. They're looking at the sweeping infrastructure, the total population, the general flow of traffic. But at the exact same time, they also have to zoom in and look closely at the specific, unique needs of its individual suburbs. The local schools, the potholes on neighborhood roads, or specific businesses on just one street. A thriving city absolutely relies on both the macro-level structure and those micro-level communities. Okay, let's dive into this and map our city analogy directly onto the field of economics. Those individual suburbs, that represents microeconomics. It's the highly technical study of individual households, individual consumers, and firms. It asks questions like, why is a single consumer buying less coffee right now? Or why is a specific local firm cutting jobs? Meanwhile, the city as a whole, the entire metropolis, is macroeconomics. Macro focuses on aggregate demand, which basically means total spending and the overall economic health of the nation. We're talking government involvement, international trade, and national unemployment rates. And the catch is, you literally can't understand one without the other. Macro trends are really just the combined result of millions and millions of micro decisions. Now, to navigate the debate we're about to get into, we need to quickly ground ourselves in the shared language that economists use. We know the basics, right? Demand is the willingness to pay, and supply is what's actually available. Zooming out, aggregate demand and aggregate supply measured the total appetite and total production across the entire economy. While inflation, that tracks the overall rising prices within it. These familiar terms, they are the exact battleground where economists clash when they start looking at the data. Section 1, the human element, how we actually decide. This brings us to the psychological core of the whole economic debate. Do humans really make perfectly logical, calculated decisions? Traditional economics leaned really heavily on something called rational choice theory, basically assuming we act like perfectly rational robots trying to maximize our personal satisfaction, effectively weighing the costs and benefits of absolutely every option. It assumes we have perfect self-control and know exactly what's best for us. But, as we all know, people aren't always rational, are they? Enter behavioral economics. This is an incredibly exciting field that argues human beings frequently lack self-control, we're swayed by our emotions, and we consistently make choices that are, frankly, bad for us. And what's really interesting about this slide is how acknowledging this human imperfection completely changes the game. Think about it. If policymakers rely purely on that rational choice theory, they might assume that slapping a small tax on sugary drinks will instantly cure obesity, simply because people will rationally calculate the higher cost. But behavioral economics steps in and tells us, well, actually, people might just pay the higher price anyway because they are irrationally attached to their afternoon sugar rush. Understanding the psychology is absolutely vital for modern economics. Section 2, the policy clash, facts versus opinions. Now, if individual humans are complicated, just imagine what happens when you put them in charge of an entire country. When economists advise governments, they actually speak in two very different languages, positive and normative statements. A positive statement is essentially the voice of the scientist. It's an objective fact about how the world works, something that can be tested with hard evidence. For example, the unemployment rate in Ireland is currently at 6%. You can literally check the statistics to prove or disprove that. A normative statement, however, is the voice of the policy advisor. It's a value judgment. It's about how the world ought to work. For example, the government should have increased spending to stimulate the economy. You can't scientifically prove a should. And honestly, much of the massive disagreement in economics comes down to people just confusing their normative opinions for positive facts. And this brilliantly illustrates the economic spectrum. Because economists hold different personal values, they end up with wildly different visions for society, dividing pretty neatly into left-wing and right-wing camps. Over on the extreme left, we see socialism and centrally planned economies. These focus heavily on collectivism, economic equality, and public ownership. But as you slide across the center towards the extreme right, you find capitalism and laissez-faire models. These champion individualism, equality of opportunity, and private ownership. Naturally, these differing political philosophies give rise to entirely different economic playbooks. On one side, you've got Keynesian economists. Generally leaning a bit more left, they believe a well-functioning economy requires government intervention. They advocate for things like imposing minimum wages, offering business grants during crises, and actively managing interest rates. But on the complete opposite side are free market economists. They advocate for a totally hands-off policy. They reject government intervention, firmly believing the marketplace will just sort out its own problems through natural self-regulation. In their view, there should be no government bailouts and definitely no massive state spending just to artificially stimulate the economy. Section 3. The ultimate reality, scarcity. Let's move on and see how this builds into the real world. We can debate Keynesian intervention versus free market self-regulation all day long, but eventually, all these competing theories come crashing into one unavoidable reality, scarcity. If we consider the breakdown of planned government expenditure for 2025, it perfectly illustrates the fundamental economic problem. People's wants are virtually unlimited, whether it's recovering from a pandemic, fixing a housing crisis, or funding climate action, but the resources to pay for them are strictly limited. Governments are constantly forced to make agonizing choices about where the money actually goes. So the crucial point is balancing this massive figure, 120 billion euros. That's the total planned expenditure. And a government is basically walking a tightrope here. If they spend too little and create a budget surplus, people view it as a massive missed opportunity to fix failing infrastructure or help out struggling citizens. But if they spend too much and run a budget deficit, well, then they have to borrow from foreign markets. That damages their international reputation and just piles on national debt for future generations to somehow pay off. Because of this absolute scarcity, every single decision carries a hidden price tag. Economists call this the opportunity cost. It's the true cost of any choice you make. When a government pledges to increase spending on healthcare, education, or transport, you know that money doesn't just magically appear out of thin air, right? It has to be taken away from other vital areas. Every single euro spent on a brand new hospital is, quite literally, a euro taken away from agriculture or tourism or housing. You just cannot have it all. Which brings us to the ultimate question. I want to put you right in the shoes of a policymaker. Knowing that human behavior is wildly unpredictable, knowing that your hard data will constantly be challenged by political opinions, and facing the harsh, unforgiving reality of absolute scarcity and opportunity cost, how would you allocate that 120 billion euros? Where exactly would you spend it? And perhaps more importantly, who would you take it away from? That agonizing trade-off is the true heart of economics. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the choices going on around you, because everything